Right.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Horstman, you authored a chapter in the book, The War on Science. And within that chapter, you mentioned we need to renormalize a culture of liberal science on campus, especially with respect to radical new ideas like equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI. You make the statement in that chapter, universities, the institutions that should be at the very heart of liberal science, are increasingly ignoring these rules. In your testimony today, you talk about your recommendations, and two of them about how we can depoliticize science funding and entrenching a culture of free speech. I think that touches upon diversity viewpoints. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. I think with respect to some of the problems with renormalizing a culture of free exchange of ideas, in that case I was referring to probably Jonathan Rauch's rules for liberal science. And that is, the first rule is that knowledge is provisional. No one has the final say. Okay, so that's very important. In his first book, he articulated or uses an example estimates for the size of the universe and how that's changed year by year, century after century. At any time, can you be sure you've got the right answer? Of course not. Everything is open, everything is contestable. Nothing is beyond question or debate. And as I mentioned, that rule is being broken because people will say such and such a controversial topic is beyond debate. The other rule is that no one has personal authority. So no one can use their personal or identity status to wall off knowledge from other people. It's universal. So that means, as I mentioned in my testimony today, that if you do an experiment right, it should be replicable by someone who speaks a different language on a different continent centuries in the future. And that, too, is being attacked in the academy through things like you have to acknowledge lived experience of that particular person or group. It's inaccessible to others. So that's defying the universal principle of knowledge and of science. You'll also hear things like an ethnic way of knowing, right? That, again, is defying the universal principle that knowledge is accessible to everyone, regardless of identity. It exists in the ether, and it's universal.
It was interesting. In your opening statement, you'd mentioned about a colleague telling you, you should stop talking about EDA. People had been talking and they were worried about what you were thinking. And then you mentioned this one quote, and you said, fear leads to censorship. And within your chapter in the book, you said, a scientist at another Canadian university told you, I have made my peace with EDI. I will lie about my most deeply held beliefs or convictions on paper in order to get funding. So in a sense, you're almost having a bit of academic dishonesty simply to avoid that notion of censorship to get the funding. And I don't think that serves the institution well.
Doesn't serve anyone well. If we are now admitting openly, well, maybe not openly, but in private at least, that many of us are just saying what we know needs to be said, even if it deeply offends our cherished beliefs and values of things like openness, the universality of knowledge, things that are deeply offensive to us. If people are saying, I'm going to just say things that counter that in order to get funding so I can continue my research program, this is very dangerous. And I think because we have to acknowledge what that might do to an individual person who accepts that they've lied, right? I think it diminishes their soul in a way, right? They're now weaker and less able to stand up and resist further incursions. I mean, when you start lying, when do you stop?
To your point, and when you are honest and do applications, you mentioned in that chapter in the book of Dr. Kembam-Patti having a grant application rejected because you talked about meritocratic principles in hiring. I was just wondering if you could expand on that, Doctor.
It would be my pleasure. In an NFRF competition in 2019, it was the first time I had to write a DEI section, and the concept of people not having all the same resources or even experiencing racism and sexism or atheism is not only not distant from me. I've experienced all these things ad nauseum, but that means I don't want that idea to propagate in any way, shape, or form. So I'm not going to judge a woman or a man or a gay or a black or a straight by anything other than, can you do quantum mechanics? Well, I said, great. I welcome everyone into my group. All you have to do is geeky enough to want to do the quantum mechanics and build lasers. I mean, I have 5 women in my group of 15 men, and they're all geeky women physicists too, just like the geeky men. We're all the same.
That application was rejected.
The application never made it to scientific review because it was purely rejected on EDI grounds. And I simply said, I've experienced more than you have probably. Having said that, that's why I believe in merit, fairness, and equality.
Thank you.
Time is up. We will now proceed to MP Rana for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for being here today. Dr. Horstman, you come from Laurier, right in my community. I'm MP for Kitchener Centre. Welcome. Thank you. My question will be directed to you, one of. I'm going to start with a direct quote between you and a conversation with a colleague. You should stop talking about EDI, my colleague suggested to me over lunch. You've got a family, he said. Think about your kids, he implored. I'll admit that my heart rate increased because it sounded a lot like, nice family you got there. Would be a shame if you were no longer able to provide for them. I've got to tell you, my heart is racing right now at the mere thought of having to choose free speech over providing for my family. That, coupled with DEI incentives, foster an administrative culture that provides securing political aligned funding over protecting academic and open inquiry. You believe that science thrives when scientists are guided by evidence and motivated by curiosity. I ask, is the Canadian scientific community thriving right now with the personal and political pressure to conform to these ideologies instead of fostering true democratic free speech in academia?
Well, thank you for the question. No, I don't think that science is thriving in Canada, and now it's not just EDI initiatives. I think it's politicization more broadly that is hindering it. As I said, I think if you're not free to speak, that has an impact that emanates out into the culture of science, so that people just tend to be hesitant. It makes you diminished. It makes you less experimental. You don't take risks. You just sit back and become small and just do some derivative work so you don't make waves, and hopefully you can just kind of be relatively, keep your head down and get through. That's increasingly the culture of science in Canada.
I agree. Thank you. That's a great segue, actually, into Professor Kamambadi. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Excellent. You're an award-winning Canadian scientist, and you've been refused 2 federal government grants on the grounds of lack of diversity. Your work explores cutting-edge laser science, a field that spans from everything from telecom to medicine, and you believe Canada could actually become a world leader in that field. But your applications for the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council, NSERC, was turned down because the council said, in quotes, the equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations in the application were deemed insufficient. When we're not focused on research itself, cutting-edge research like you're working on in your facility, that Canada can actually become the lead on, and we focus instead on DEI, what's the economic impact of that, especially in tech hubs where I'm from, like Kitchener?
It's a wonderful question. I thank you for asking that. I'm very thrilled you asked that, because there's often a misconception that you fund science like you fund education, and it makes people happy and nice and good things. You know, everyone feels nice about themselves, like kindergarten. No. Science is the driver of economic progress, first and foremost. Absolutely true. There is no economic progress without science. Otherwise, we're just digging for gold or coal. That's why we can have quantum computers. That's why we have encryption. That's why we have MRI machines. It's because of science. So if we stop this progress by giving resources to people who are less qualified, and it is absolutely necessarily the case that when you use DEI, you are discriminating. And you're discriminating and following in the footsteps of intellectual racism from Britain in the 1880s, which was actually very popular. And in anthropology, perhaps my colleague could know, you could get tenure in racism. It was a thing. I just got tenure in racism. Woo! So that now we have, I just got tenure in DEI. It's the same thing. Like in communism, they politicized science to such an extent that the Ukrainians starved and cannibalized each other because they didn't believe in capitalist genetics. So the opportunity cost is astronomical, and Canada was a leader. One of my heroes here is Dwayne Miller at Toronto, and he was a leader, and he's retirement age almost. He'll be angry if I say that, but I want to follow in his footsteps. And he was my inspiration. Do I care that he's from India or China, or he's actually from Manitoba? But, that's fine. So
sorry for interrupting. Time is up.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Now we will proceed to MP Noor Mohammed for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, MP Noor Mohammed. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, all the participants. My question is to you, Dr. Horstman. I would love to mention your recent article, Woke Hermit Kingdom, Canada Doubles Down on EDI, as you mentioned. So my question is, you argue many EDI practices are ineffective or even harmful. But do you explore under what conditions or designs EDI has succeeded?
Well, what I think I need to explain something here. I think it's important to talk about what's called the Mott and Bailey tactic. So with respect to EDI, we see a lot of this. So as I've experienced and demonstrated today, EDI generally involves sweeping programs of racial discrimination, compelled speech, censorship. But when people start to complain about it and it comes under fire, what happens is that the EDI advocates retreat to positions like, well, it's just about making sure that we have good experimental design so that seatbelts are designed accounting for women. That's got nothing to do with EDI. That has long been good experimental practice, and that's why you just have to have lots of rigor, review, contestation of different ideas so that you can seek out and find error and remove it. So I don't know of any cases where EDI has been beneficial.
Over these two past committee meetings, we have heard from various professionals and scholars of how beneficial EDI has been at ensuring all Canadians are on a fair playing field. Throughout your time in academia, what possible negative consequences over EDI have you witnessed?
Negative consequences of EDI have been legion. I mean, I expressed some of them there, but I can provide more. For example, my department was awarded what's called an Inclusive Excellence Program. Now, this is an Orwellian term that just means we're going to restrict it to certain limited groups. It's not including, it's excluding, and you're limiting the applicant pool severely. So here's what happened. Our university decided that in the wake of 2021, they wanted to hire 6 black scholars and 6 indigenous scholars. Our department was awarded one of the positions for an indigenous scholar. Upon hearing this, a colleague of mine from outside the department related to me that they knew of a really good postdoc in the United States who was black, and it would be really good to get this person to apply. Of course, I had to tell my colleague that this person is excluded because they have the wrong skin color. This is the in and out daily experience of EDI policies. They're discriminatory, exclusionary, and they are, I see no good in them. They're dark.
is up. And now we will have 2 minutes for the Conservatives and 2 minutes for the Liberals. Okay, so we will have, next we will have Mr. Mahal for 2 minutes. Mr. Mahal, please go ahead. You will have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start with Dr. Kamala Betty. Since we are out of time, I have to be limited on the question. You mentioned earlier in your testimony that politicization of science is diminishing research and discoveries. That was your gist of. So my question to you is, are we heading into being into a socialistic regime under the mandatory requirements of EDI being pushed by the left politics? So, and what are the dangers of that trend?
Thank you for your question. I can say absolutely true. What you've said, and as you've summarized, is 100% accurate. There has been institutional capture by leftist ideologues who represent maybe 10% of Canada, and probably 90% disagree. Not just conservatives, probably liberals, centrists. Most people disagree. Most scientists disagree, but they don't want to say anything. They're afraid to say anything for losing funding, like myself or Jeff. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I would say to the point that these programs fundamentally demoralize everyone. People who might go in. Children say, I can't go into science. My sons say, I can't go into science because it's only for women. My sons say that. They're McGill students.
My next question is, we heard from across the panel that EDI in principle was meant to achieve different results. So if the EDI is not achieving the results that it was supposed to achieve, should we not stop it, in your opinion?
Absolutely, because I think, as the great economist Milton Friedman once said, you do not judge a policy based upon its intentions. You judge it based on its outcomes. And then you, the politicians, are empowered to make changes. And that's how democracy works. And that's how project management works. That's how science works. We get input and we change our mind.
Now we will end our panel with MP McKelvey for 2 minutes. MP McKelvey, please go ahead.